In today's scary story, a young woman finds the occupant of her new home not as welcoming as she would like. Do enjoy today's tale, but please do not sit in that armchair. The rain pattered softly against the windows of the taxi as Emily Dalton watched the streets of London pass by. She was moving to Acton, a world away from the bustling centre she was used to. Emily, an inspiring author, had always dreamt of a quiet place to write her first novel. And now, she thought, gazing at the rain-blurred buildings, maybe she had found it. The taxi pulled up in front of the Victorian-era house, its facade showing signs of age, but retaining a certain timeless charm. The estate agent had told her it was a steal, a large property that had been on the market for many years with no takers. Apparently, local rumours and the house's dilapidated state had turned potential buyers away, but for Emily, it was an opportunity too good to pass by. She stepped out into the drizzle, her boots splashing in a puddle as she took into her new home. The house was imposing, with its towering gables and a sense of history that was almost tangible. She could see why people might be put off, but to her, it was perfect. A place with character, a place that had stories to tell. Dragging her suitcase behind her, Emily made her way up the creaky steps to the front door. The key, an old-fashioned brass one, felt heavy in her hand. She turned it in the lock, the door groaning as it opened to reveal the shadowy interior. The house was just as she imagined. High ceilings, wooden floors, and a kind of vintage charm you couldn't replicate. She wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Each room was filled with the remnants of the past. A faded wallpaper here, an antique chandelier there. It felt like stepping back in time. In the living room, with its large bay windows looking out to the overgrown garden, she decided she would set up her writing space. As she stood there, imagining her desk by the window, a sudden chill swept through the room. She shivered, attributing it to the old drafty windows, but somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that it might be something else. That night, as she lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that she was not alone. There was a sense of being watched, a presence that she couldn't quite define. She told herself it was just her imagination, fueled by the stories the estate agent had laughingly told her about the house's last owner, an old man who had been a bit of a recluse, a bit eccentric. But she drifted off to sleep. She thought she heard a whisper, so faint she wasn't sure if it was real or just the remnants of a dream. Intruder, it seemed to say, and Emily's last conscious thought was that perhaps the house wasn't as welcoming as she had hoped. The old house creaked and groaned as if it were alive, settling into the silence of the night. Emily lay in bed, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy stillness in the air. Just as she was about to drift back to sleep, a faint noise from downstairs jolted her awake. It was a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like something being moved. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, Emily slipped out of bed. The house was dark, the only light coming from the moon casting ghostly shadows through the windows. She crept down the stairs, her heart racing with each step. The old wooden steps creaked under her weight, betraying her silent approach. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. The living room loomed before her, filled with shadows and half-seen objects. There, in the far corner, was an old chair. It was an antique, its fabric faded and worn, but what caught her attention was the shape that seemed to be sitting in it. A darker patch of shadow that suggested a human form. "Who are you?" Emily's voice barely rose above a whisper, her throat tight with fear. No reply came, only the sound of her own breathing and a distant rustling of leaves outside. She inched closer to the chair, her hands trembling. As she reached it, she realized with a start that it was empty, nothing but the chair and the deep shadows it cast. "Must be my nerves," she muttered to herself, trying to sound convincing. She turned to head back upstairs, her heart still pounding in her chest. But then, as she reached the top of the stairs, she heard it, a whisper so faint she almost doubted she had heard it at all. "Get out of my house," it hissed, a voice filled with anger and pain. Emily spun around, her eyes searching the darkness at the foot of the stairs. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure, a mere outline, barely more substantial than the shadows around it. But as she strained her eyes to see, it vanished, melting into the darkness. Her heart pounding, Emily rushed back to her room, locking the door behind her. She slid down against it, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Was it her imagination, fueled by the stories and the eerie atmosphere of the old house? Or was there something more, a presence, still lingering in the walls of her new home? Lying awake in her bed, Emily knew one thing for certain. The house was hiding secrets, and whether she liked it or not, she was now a part of them. The whisper echoed in her mind, a warning or a threat, she couldn't tell. But she knew she couldn't ignore it. The mystery of the house, of the old man who had once lived there, was slowly drawing her in. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the old house, casting a warm, if somewhat eerie light on the antique furnishings. Emily, despite the restless night, busied herself with tidying up, the events of the previous evening still fresh in her mind. The sound of the doorbell broke her concentration. It was Lucy, her closest friend, bright and cheerful as always. "So this is the place, huh? Looks like something out of the Twilight Zone," Lucy joked, stepping inside. Emily couldn't help but laugh, the tension easing from her shoulders. The two made their way to the living room, settling in with coffee. The conversation was light, filled with laughter and the comfort of familiar company. Lucy's eyes soon fell on the old chair in the corner. "Oh, look! This is an old chair, it's amazing!" Lucy exclaimed, running her hand over the fabric. "Yes, it was here when I arrived," Emily replied, her gaze lingering on the chair, the memories of last night casting a shadow over her thoughts. Lucy, oblivious to Emily's unease, sat down in the chair, crossing her legs comfortably. They continued chatting, the room filled with the sound of their voices. But then, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. Lucy's face contorted, her voice dropping to a deep, guttural growl. "Get the hell out of my house, and get this bitch out of my chair!" She spat, her eyes blazing with an anger that was not her own. Emily froze, her heart in her throat. The voice, the words, they were identical to the whisper she had heard the night before. But before she could react, Lucy blinked, her expression returning to normal. "You okay, Emily? You look like you've seen a ghost," Lucy said, her voice light and cheerful again. Emily, still in shock, forced a laugh. "Just tired from all the moving, that's all," she managed to say, her eyes not leaving Lucy. "All right, get some rest, okay? See you soon, Emily," Lucy said as she got up to leave, seemingly unaffected by what had just happened. After Lucy left, Emily sat back in the living room, her gaze fixed on the old chair. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was the house affecting Lucy, or was she imagining things? As she pondered this, the chair moved. It was a slight, almost imperceptible shift, but enough to make Emily jump. Her breath caught in her chest, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The events of the night, Lucy's outburst, the chair moving on its own, it was too much to be mere coincidence. Emily stood up, her resolve hardening. She needed answers. The house, the old man, the strange occurrences. There was a story here, a mystery that was slowly unravelling, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter how unsettling the truth might be. Emily's fingers danced across the keyboard of her laptop, the rhythmic clacking of the keys filling the quiet living room. She was determined to focus on her work, to ignore the eerie occurrences that seemed to be plaguing the old house. But just as she was getting into the flow of her writing, her laptop flickered and shut off abruptly. "Oh no," she muttered, her frustration mounting. She tried to reboot it, her fingers hovering over the keys. That's when she saw it. In the laptop's black, reflective screen, the clear image of an old man, his eyes staring back at her. With a sharp intake of breath, she spun around, only to find the room empty. No sign of anyone. Shaken, Emily tried to calm her racing heart. "It's just my imagination," she whispered to herself, though the conviction in her voice was lacking. She turned back to her laptop, which finally decided to come back to life, but the relief was short-lived. The screen distorted, and a harsh, angry voice emanated from the speakers. "Get out!" In panic, Emily grabbed her phone and rushed out of the house. The fresh air outside felt like a sanctuary compared to the oppressive atmosphere of the house. "Right, let's get some answers," she said to herself, her determination overcoming her fear. Sitting in a local cafe, with the comforting buzz of people around her, Emily brought up Google on her phone. She started with the address of the house, but her search yielded nothing of note. She then typed in "ghost house in Acton," and there it was, her house, the subject of an old news story. Her eyes scanned the article. It told the story of Mr. Watts, a former occupant who had fiercely resisted the council's attempt to move him to a care home. He had died in the house, alone and defiant. The article also mentioned previous owners who had experienced unexplained noises, bumps in the night, and ghostly apparitions, all of which had driven them to leave the house. As Emily read, a chill ran down her spine. The story of Mr. Watts seemed to align eerily with her own experiences. The whispers, the apparitions, the sense of anger and resentment, it all pointed to the old man's spirit, still lingering in the house, unable to let go of his beloved home. She finished her coffee, her mind racing with this new information. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, forming a picture that was as fascinating as it was frightening. Emily knew that she couldn't just leave this mystery unsolved. She needed to find out more about Mr. Watts, to understand why his spirit was so restless. With a newfound sense of purpose, Emily left the cafe. She was no longer just an author in search of a quiet place to write. She was now a detective of sorts, delving into the past of her new home, determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting of the old house in Acton. Emily paced nervously in her living room, her phone pressed to her ear. "Lucy, I'm telling you, something strange is happening in this house," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "You'd better not be winding me up, Emily." Lucy's sceptical voice came through the speaker. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "Okay, I'll come over as soon as I can." Later that day, Lucy arrived, but she wasn't alone. This is Derek," she introduced, gesturing to the man beside her. "He's a medium. We go way back. He's always going on about how he can see things and telling me tales," Lucy said, with a roll of her eyes. "Honestly, I think he just wants to get a peek at my bra, but it's worth a shot." Derek, unfazed by Lucy's teasing, extended a hand to Emily. "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said with a warm smile. "Hello," Emily replied, still processing the turn of events. As they sat down, Emily recounted everything that had happened, from the eerie whispers to the disturbing apparition in the spare room. Derek listened intently, nodding occasionally. "I want to start in the living room," Derek said after Emily finished her story. "Let's see if we can sense anything." The group moved to the living room, the air thick with anticipation. Derek closed his eyes, taking deep breaths, but after a few moments, he opened them and shrugged. "Nothing. Seems pretty normal." "It's official then. Emily, you're a crackpot," Lucy joked, and the two women shared a giggle, trying to dispel the tension. Derek excused himself to explore the rest of the house. "I'll just take a look around," he said, heading upstairs. "Hope your knickers are locked away," Lucy whispered to Emily, both of them laughing. Upstairs, Derek felt an inexplicable pull towards the spare room. As he entered, the floorboards creaked ominously under his feet. His eyes were drawn to the old built-in cupboard in the corner. Slowly, he approached it, his heart racing. The cupboard door squealed as he opened it, peering into the dark space. For a split second, he thought he saw the outline of a man. Then, a face lunged at him from the darkness, snarling, "Get out of my house!" The voice was filled with rage and despair. In a state of sheer terror, Derek bolted from the room, nearly tripping over his feet as he raced down the stairs. He arrived at the bottom, his face pale and his trousers embarrassingly wet from fear. "I've got to go," he stammered, rushing towards the door and disappearing into the evening. Emily and Lucy, shocked by his sudden departure, looked at each other in disbelief. "Why the hell did you bring that weirdo here, Lucy?" Emily asked, her voice a mix of frustration and fear. Lucy, equally bewildered, could only shrug. "I thought he might help," she replied, her usual confidence shaken. The house, once a symbol of new beginnings for Emily, now felt more like a prison, its secrets darker and more menacing than she could have ever imagined. The ghostly presence of Mr. Watts seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, and Emily knew that she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to find a way to confront the haunting and uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Emily watched as Lucy made herself comfortable on the couch, a makeshift bed for the night. "Will you stay, Lucy?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "I'm really spooked over this whole thing." "Sure, but I've got to leave first thing in the morning. I have a presentation to attend," Lucy replied, trying to sound reassuring. As the clock struck midnight, the house was enveloped in an eerie silence. Emily lay in her bed, her mind racing with thoughts of the day's events. Suddenly, she awoke with a jolt. Certain she had heard a noise from downstairs, her heart pounding, she cautiously descended the stairs. At the bottom, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, standing over Lucy's sleeping form on the couch, was the figure of an old man. His face twisted in anger. He was muttering, "I'm not leaving. Get out!" Frozen in fear, Emily watched as the ghostly figure turned to her. "Get out of my house!" it snarled, charging towards her with a menacing glare. In a moment of unexpected courage, Emily stood her ground. "No!" she said firmly, her voice steady despite her fear. To her astonishment, The figure halted in its tracks. "Why don't you just leave me alone?" it said, the anger in its voice replaced by a hint of desperation. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished into thin air. Lucy, oblivious to the entire incident, continued to sleep peacefully on the couch. Emily, her heart still racing, curled up on the floor next to her friend, seeking comfort in her presence. As the first light of dawn crept into the living room, Lucy stirred awake. "Hey, Emily, all good? I really have to dash," she said, quickly getting ready to leave. Once again, Emily found herself alone in the house, the encounter from the night still vivid in her mind. She felt a mix of fear and determination. The ghost, Mr. Watts, seemed trapped in a cycle of anger and despair, unable to move on. Emily knew she had to find a way to help him, to find peace, to break the cycle that kept him bound to the house. The heavy curtains drawn, Emily sat alone in a dimly lit living room, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "I want to help you, Mr. Watts. I'm not here to force you out, but to try and help." She spoke into the stillness, her voice barely above a whisper. In the old chair, a shadowy figure slowly materialized, its form barely visible in the dim light. "I'm not leaving. This is my home," the figure whispered, its voice filled with a weary defiance. "I don't care how many times you scare me or make noises in the night. I'm not leaving," the figure continued, its tone bitter. Emily's brow furrowed in confusion. "I thought it was the council who wanted to get you out of your home," she asked, trying to piece together the ghost's fragmented story. Silence followed, a heavy, expectant silence that seemed to press down on the room. "Does this mean someone was scaring you? Like you're scaring me?" Emily ventured again, her soft voice. Then the figure of the old man became clearer, more solid than ever. "Leave me alone," he bellowed, loud and angry. Emily recoiled, startled by the sudden outburst. She took a moment to calm her racing heart, realizing the complexity of the situation. It wasn't just a simple case of a spirit haunting the living. It was more personal, more poignant. The ghost of Mr. Watts, it seemed, had its own demons, his own fears. Perhaps he too had been haunted, not by spirits, but by the living, by the threat of eviction, by the loneliness of his final days, by the memories that clung to the walls of his beloved home. Emily's resolve hardened. She needed to understand the full story, to uncover the truth behind Mr. Watts' refusal to leave. Only then could she hope to find a resolution, not just for herself, but for the troubled spirit that refused to find peace. As she sat there, staring at the now empty chair, Emily knew that her journey into the house's past was far from over. She needed to delve deeper, to uncover the hidden layers of Mr. Watts' life and death. Only then could she hope to break the cycle of fear and anger that held both her and the ghost captive. Emily sat in the armchair, the fabric worn and familiar beneath her fingers. "There has to be a way," she whispered to herself, her mind racing with thoughts of Mr. Watts and the haunting. As she pondered, the ghostly form of Mr. Watts materialized, rising from the very chair she occupied. He turned to her, a smile of gratitude on his translucent face. "Thank you," he said softly, before fading into nothingness. Confused and startled, Emily tried to stand, but her body refused to obey. Panic surged through her as she realized she couldn't move, couldn't feel her limbs. Time seemed to warp around her, the room fading in and out of focus. Then, as if from a distant world, she saw a police officer forcefully breaking down the front door. He entered the living room, his face twisted in discomfort, avoiding looking directly at the chair where she sat. Emily tried to scream, "Help, I can't move!" But no sound came from her lips. No movement broke her stillness. Horrified, she watched helplessly as they carried her lifeless body out of the house. She remained in the chair, a silent observer to the passage of time. She saw decorators revitalize the once debilitated house, their laughter and chatter filling the space she could no longer touch. A new couple eventually moved in, their voices echoing through the hallways. "An absolute steal," they said, unaware of the house's somber history. "They said no one else wanted it." Emily watched them, their lives unfolding where hers had ended, a spectre trapped in an internal vigil. Then, one night, she saw the man of the house descend the stairs, his face creased with confusion. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness, his eyes fixed on the old armchair. In that moment, something within Emily stirred. She rose from the chair, a surge of emotion propelling her forward. "Get out of my house!" she found herself shouting, her voice a ghostly echo in the night. And so, Emily became the new guardian of the house, bound to it as Mr. Watts once was. In her quest to free him, she had unknowingly taken his place, her spirit tied to the home she had sought to save. She watched over the house and its inhabitants, a silent protector, a whisper in the shadows, a story yet to be told. And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video, unless of course you're frozen with fear already.